Okay, this is a big one. Can your iPhone be hacked? Well, if it has a wire, it can be hacked. Okay, so we're going to talk about how it can be hacked. What are the things you can do to stop your smartphone from getting hacked? We've had a lot of comments about this article that I sent out in my newsletter on Monday, the Monday newsletter, the free one, my insider show notes at craigpeterson.com. And WeLiveSecurity.com had this. Andre Lemarius is the author of this. And he was asking the question about your iPhone. Now, we know that iPhones tend to be more secure than Android phones. In fact, they tend to be a whole lot more secure. So how secure are they? And I got to say, most of these problems with iPhones that we're going to discuss have to do with you and I not treating them securely. Is that a surprise or not, right? Apple has, from the very beginning, designed the Apple operating system around the principles of least access. And I think that's a very, very good thing to do, frankly, when you get right down to it. Because the whole concept of least access means that you can and will be able to just get on and do what you need to do, but nothing else, right? So Apple's operating system, it has a whole bunch of roots, but they've kept this in mind. Now compare that to our friends at Microsoft, for instance. Microsoft took the Internet Protocol code and shoehorned it into Windows, which is part of the reason Windows has been so terrible. The other part is, well, there's a lot of reasons, so I won't go into them all now. But Unix was designed in the university environment. Well, initially, of course, at AT&T, Bell Labs, they wanted to run on everything, so there was some security in there. And then once it hit UC Berkeley, all of a sudden you had all these kids trying to break into it, and it had all of this wonderful networking stuff. They explored a bunch of protocols. Unix, man, back in that day, it was so great to be working on this stuff. It was so cool. And then we moved forward, and it did get adopted in the form of FreeBSD. And frankly, there's a microkernel underneath all of this whole thing with Apple, which is also an amazing thing that really Apple hasn't taken full advantage of. And then Apple introduced the isolation of processes, further isolation. Of course, they're isolated in Unix to begin with, unlike MS-DOS or earlier versions of Windows. And once they're isolated, ta-da, we're getting a lot safer. And then they introduced the concept of, well, let's have code signatures, let's use public keys and private keys in order to have developers sign them. And then we'll have software analyze everything that's put into the App Store, so we know that it's probably safe, if not absolutely safe. They've done a whole lot of stuff, right? So that's the iPhone. Android was written by a few guys in a garage. You know, of course, that's kind of how Apple started, right? A few guys in a garage. But Google came along and bought it and ran with it and has been adding a lot of features. They kind of did the Microsoft thing, right? Let's add features. Who cares if they're secure, if they work or not? Microsoft has changed its attitude lately. And Google has as well. Google's been trying to make things safer, no question. By the way, if you have a Pixel, what was it? They just announced, I think it was the Pixel 4 phone. It only had 3 years of support. Ta-da! They're completely bricking those phones now going forward. No more updates for you. So people who bought the Pixel thinking, yeah, well, Google's going to support it. It's going to be a good thing. Surprise, surprise. Back to the iPhone now. The most dangerous things you can do on your Android phone and your iPhone is to hack them, to root them. There's a lot of different words people use to describe what they do so they can get around the restrictions that the operating system has put in place. And those restrictions are in there for very, very good reasons, no matter the operating system. And if you are rooting your phones, particularly iPhones, you can do what's called side-loading apps. Now, in the Google space, it's pretty easy to side-load apps. In the In the iOS space, not so easy, at least not to be able to have an app that runs natively right on top of the operating system. There are ways to install an app that can run other apps, and that's a little less dangerous than having them directly on the phone. So why is a Sideloaded app more dangerous? Well, because it does not have the oversight of the Google Play Store or the oversight of the Apple App Store, which does have oversight, which does try and get the software out into people's hands, right? It does a whole lot of things. And one of the biggest complaints about iOS is how slow it's been in adopting new features. I've talked about security features, and iOS has been way ahead of Android devices for years, but Android's been ahead in other features. So in order to overcome some of these so-called deficiencies, things where they might want to customize more on the home screen or add some other whiz-bangs here or there, they have something called sideloading. They jailbreak their phone. Okay, that's another word for rooting your phone. So don't do that. Anybody, please don't do that. It's a very, very bad idea. However, the European Union, of course, they have infinite wisdom. It is a very large government there in Brussels that runs the whole EU. They're about the size of the United States now when it comes to their population. The EU has said, Apple, we need you to allow sideloaded apps on the iPhone. And of course, Apple's been pushing back, saying, hey, we don't want apps on the iPhone that aren't part of our App Store. And to that, the EU and developers respond saying, well, yeah, you guys, all you're trying to do is rip us off and make money and charge 30% on every app that we sell just to be on your store. Well, okay, I can see both sides of that argument. Apple built the infrastructure. Apple became the biggest one out there. It isn't as though it just happened magically. And because that magic wand smiled at Apple now and didn't smile on someone else, Apple really needs to kind of step down from that throne. We're not going to get into that right now. That can get into some religious wars, okay? But content from Apple's App Store has various limitations placed on it. And that's one of them is downloading these widgets and other things from third-party stores. Sideloading, which is getting an app from an unofficial store, can also be done by downloading it directly through a website on Safari or other browsers. Kind of depends on how the code is written and what it needs to do. So we're not going to get into the debate of whether or not that you should be able to put them on. I like the idea of why can't I put whatever I want on my computer, on my phone, etc. I can see that, guys. I get that. On the other side of that is I'm not going to do that because it's dangerous. So that's one of the big problems. Fake apps in the App Store is another thing. So don't sideload. And fake apps, that's out of your control, really. You need to pay close attention to what you're doing. And the Apple official App Store is generally known to provide you with safe content, safe apps, right? And it goes through or has gone through a process looking for bugs, privacy policy concerns, the ID, third-party ad providers, licensing requirements, a whole bunch of stuff, right? Apple's doing a decent job there. But sometimes something slips through. One of the things that comes to my mind, which has been the biggest thing ever, was these wallpapers people were downloading for Android. And I remember my first Android phone, I had downloaded one of these wallpapers and then did some more investigation, looked at it, and the wallpapers were stealing the contacts. They were stealing information from the phone from a wallpaper. Now, some of that hasn't happened on the iPhone, no doubt about that, but you can even go to a website on your iPhone or your Android, and that website can have JavaScript, which is a programming language, running things like miners, Bitcoin mining, etc. So if your battery dies faster than you think it should, or if your phone is getting hot, you might well have some evil software on your computer, okay? Fake antivirus, that's a very, very big one. Friend of mine keeps downloading this so-called antivirus for his Mac, which isn't an antivirus, which is really a problem. It's spyware, and he pays for it, okay? That's what I don't get. So here you go. Here's another one. Another fake antivirus found on Apple's App Store was charging $150 for 3 months to remove non-existent viruses. Because, of course, there's viruses, right? People are used to that from the Microsoft side. And viruses can get onto anything. Ultimately, we all know that. So what do? They sell fake antivirus software. So this thing claimed to detect over 100 viruses and charged $150 for 3 months to so-called remove them. Now, be careful with calendars, by the way, because the calendar app kind of seems like it's probably pretty safe, but it's one of the most common ways to distribute malware on your iOS device. Isn't that something? So hackers can send you invites. They come from leaked email addresses or from you after you've unintentionally subscribed to calendar events on dodgy websites. So don't subscribe to calendar events on websites that you cannot absolutely trust. That's that simple. Make sure you get this article and more in the weeks to come. CraigPeterson.com. Sign up right there. You know those text messages that you get that come out of the blue from someone that you don't know and you have no idea why they're sending you anything? Well, those might be smishing messages, and the IRS has issued a big warning about them. You probably know what phishing is, right? Phishing is where someone sits in a boat all day long and tries to catch a fish. It's not called catching, it's called fishing, because you never know if you will catch something, and sometimes you don't even know what you might catch. Well, there's the phishing for the industrial world, for the internet. There you go. And this type of phishing is spelled phishing, and it's kind of similar. Typically, with a phishing attack, what will happen is they will send out emails to thousands or millions of people in hopes that enough people respond to make it worth their while. So they'll try and trick them into doing something, sending a message, going to a website, downloading malware, whatever it might be. So that's called phishing. There's vishing, which is voice phishing, where they'll make phone calls, usually pretending to be tech support or HR or someone else. And then there's smishing as well. Yeah, there's a lot of these out there. And smishing is where you are sent a text message, an SMS message, and they expect you to respond. And so the SMS message, again, might be trying to get you to click on a link. It might be trying to get you to respond, in fact, to that message or make a phone call by clicking on the message. Or there's a lot of things that they try and get you to do. Well, we have, from Info Security Magazine, a warning that the IRS came out with. They're warning taxpayers of an exponential increase in text-based phishing attempts. And they're urging users to report these campaigns to the IRS to help the government stop them, or at least disrupt them, right? So, good all the way around. So far, so good. Well, in a news alert yesterday, this is yesterday in the article, the tax agency said it had identified thousands of fake domains so far in 2022, which are used to facilitate the so-called smishing scams. Now, these websites are designed to steal your personal and financial information. And one of the, nowadays anyways, the best indicators of whether or not a site is legitimate is its age. There are millions and millions of websites, web domains out there. And those sites that only came online within the last couple of months, those are suspect. So if you are trying to get a business going online and you registered a domain and you're setting it up and everything's looking good for you, but you're not getting visitors. And in fact, sometimes people try and click on the link on your email to go to your website and they can't get there, or the link has been flagged. It's because of these bad guys. They register a domain. They, within a month or two, use that domain by trying to get people to go there from either these phishing emails or, in this case, smishing surge. In fact, this is so big, the IRS is calling it an industrial scale smishing surge. Try and say that fast. So it's spoofed messages appearing like they're from the IRS. They often use lures like fake COVID relief, tax credits. Man, there was a lot during the lockdown, a lot of these fake COVID things. Tax credits, help setting up an IRS online account. They might request personal information. They might covertly download malware to your device by tricking you into clicking on a malicious link. Sound familiar? So this is phishing on an industrial scale, so thousands of people can be at risk of receiving these scam messages. That's according to the IRS Commissioner Commish. In recent months, he said, the IRS has reported multiple large-scale smishing campaigns that have delivered thousands and even hundreds of thousands of IRS-themed messages in hours or a few days, far exceeding previous levels of activity. Automated toolings helping to drive the surge. IRS claimed that just 36 stolen or bogus email addresses were used to create over 1,000 fraudulent domains for a recent smishing campaign. And they're urging us and tax professionals to keep reporting these smishing attempts that you're discovering. So what they want you to do, if you get a text message that's impersonating the IRS isn't going around sending out random text messages, guys, okay? So if you get one of these, they say, send an email to phishing, which is, of course, phishing, at irs.gov. Copy in the caller ID number or the email address that the message was sent from. Paste that number or address, obviously, into the email. And they're really, this is something else. They're telling you exactly how to do it. Press and hold the SMS/text message and select copy. And then paste it in. Include the exact time, date, time zone, telephone number that received the message if you dare, and send it again. It's phishing at irs.gov. Expect a lot of that this year. It's interesting looking at statistics that really, the frauds go up during a downturn in the economy. And I guess that makes sense, right? They're trying to make more money, or at least keep their monetary income just continuing to increase, even though things are down overall. So crypto scams are also soaring. And remember I mentioned the domains, how the bad guys are registering them and then using them almost immediately? Well, Info Security Magazine has an article talking about this, saying that the number of domains have surged 335%. That's registrations, by the way, not overall domains. But their Group IB, which is a cybersecurity company, said it had detected over 2,000 domains registered to be used as fake promotion websites in the first half of this year. Isn't that something? That's a 335% increase on the number recorded last year. Five-fold increase compared to the second half of 2021, and 53-fold rise in comparison with the first half of 2021. That's something. So most of the fake sites are targeting English and Spanish speakers. 63% of the fake sites were registered with Russian registrars. Now that's interesting too. That kind of leads you to believe that these guys are operating out of Russia. And victims are being lured to these sites here for the crypto scams via fraudulent YouTube streams featuring popular figures like Elon Musk and Brad Garlinghouse, this footballer over in Europe. If you follow that at all, you might know Cristiano Ronaldo, and even El Salvador President Nayib Bukele, which is, by the way, El Salvador's, they've adopted Bitcoin as their official national currency. So be careful, right? If you're seeing some of these videos, they are scams trying to get you to go to a website, invest in crypto. We've all heard how great crypto is. Crypto has not been doing well lately, and you've got to be very, very careful. By the way, these scammers, according to, again, Group IB, said that one group of fraudsters managed to make nearly $1.7 million in just 3 days after luring victims to fake sites via 36 YouTube streams. Yeah, isn't that something? Absolutely crazy. Hopefully you got these this week. Both of these articles, the one from this info security stuff, is in the newsletter that went out Monday. Don't miss next week's or any week following. Go to craigpeterson.com and subscribe while you're there. craigpeterson.com/subscribe. A word of warning here for businesses. You know, if you have computers and you're done with them, what do you do with them next? You know, the federal government has huge shredders that'll shred the whole machine, but how about you? Well, clients come first, don't they? In fact, that's what it says. The opening sentence of its main page. Clients come first. Morgan Stanley. It bills itself as the global leader in financial services. And man, do they really take care of your information. It's just, your PII, your personally identifiable information. Man, could you ask for more than what Morgan Stanley provides? Well, it turns out you can. Because Morgan Stanley has been fined $35 million by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, I know to Morgan Stanley, $35 million isn't even really a rounding error. To you and me, that's good money. I wouldn't mind having $35 million. I'd retire instantly, right? Who wouldn't? But it still brings home a point for every last one of us. We've had clients that have been at the point where they have to get rid of old equipment. And some of them just have, dumped them. Others have given them to schools as a bit of a tax write-off. It's interesting for me to analyze the clients that did that and how they did it. But what should you do? If you are a home user, if you are a business user, well, I can tell you what we do for DoD contracts, and we'll work our way down. But for the Department of Defense contractors, we actually have a kiln that's designed to melt down hard disk platters. And we have these ingots, for lack of a better term, of aluminum from the platters. Now, some disks have glass platters. Those are easy enough to destroy. But if you melt them down, there is no recovering any of that data. Now, if you're a regular business, you can do a few different things. For instance, I have a drill press. And on that drill press, I have a metal bit, a nice big one. And what you can do to reasonably destroy that disc is to put it on the drill press. Of course, take all safety precautions, including wearing eye covering, and drill 3 big holes in that, just a few inches out from the center of the disc platter. And that will destroy it quite well. Not as good as what the Department of Defense wants, can't blame them, because there's still some data that's on there. But you'd really, really have to want that data in order to try and recover anything. And you would only be able to recover some various parts of it. That's why we melt down the disks, the platters, for some of our clients that have information that needs to be kept a little bit more private. Now, the next level, by the way, you can do the drill press trick with SSDs as well as with spinning disks. SSDs, you've got to really demolish the heck out of that drive. But just destroy it. Some people, well, Hillary Clinton, right? When she had their smart devices subpoenaed, how did she destroy them? It was only a subpoena for a court order, so of course you destroy them. Well, she used a ball-peen hammer and use that hammer to just beat the living daylights out of it. And once that was done, ta-da, we're done, and there's nothing left that's of any use. So you can use a hammer on a hard disk. I wouldn't say so much. On a smartphone, another small electronics device, it would be very effective. Again, safety precautions, everybody. You don't want to hurt yourself as you're doing this. And for things like thumb drives, USB thumb drives, just take a hammer to it. It doesn't have to be a ball-peen hammer. You don't have to follow Hillary Clinton's lead. Maybe that's why she wasn't prosecuted for destroying evidence that was under subpoena. I don't know. But that's an easy way to destroy some of the smaller devices. Now, what if you have, sensitive information on a computer, but it's not like the end of the world? Well, what I have done is I've gone online. There are a couple of different ways to do this. What I've preferred to do is download some software, very simple software. It runs a Linux operating system. Not that you need to know that, because you just download it, you put it on a thumb drive, or maybe burn it to a CD. Who does that anymore? And put it in the machine, boot it up. It only takes seconds to boot up, and then it gives you a little menu. What do you want to do? Just a basic wipe of the drives, or do you want to go crazy and use the DoD standard wipe? And that can run for some hours, depending on how much space is available on that drive. And it's a very, very good thing to do, because at that point now, there's nothing left on the machine at all, nothing readable. It has done multiple passes, writing random data, zeros and ones, so it's unrecoverable. That's for sure. Maybe, the FSB or the CIA, NSA has some ways to get at it, but I really kind of doubt it. And then on that computer, if it's a Windows computer, it's going to have a license. So you can reinstall Windows using that license. If it's a Mac, you can easily just reinstall the Mac OS. No problem there. You don't need a license number or anything like you do with Windows. And off it will go. And then you can donate that to your favorite charity, or just give it to someone in need, which is what I have done forever. Give it to somebody who really could use the computer. Kids nowadays need the computers for school. People need the computers for working from home. And just because it isn't meeting your needs anymore in the business doesn't mean it won't meet their needs. Then, of course, the other thing they can do once they have got that computer in the hot little hands is they can buy a new disk for it. I have a Mac 5K, in fact, in front of me right now. And it was a little slow, getting a little sluggish. And I reinstalled just to see if there was some garbage kind of sitting around, and that didn't really help because I was comparing it with these other newer, faster computers. So what I did is I pulled out the Fusion drive that was in there, which Apple had for, a little year or more, and that is something to kind of speed things up and keep the costs down. So it's like an SSD and a spinning disk all in one basic unit. And I replaced those with solid-state drives. And I replaced one of them, the unit that was part of the Fusion drive that was the high-speed part, I replaced that with a very high-speed, kind of one of those thumbstick drives that you can buy nowadays. So that machine is quite fast now, plenty fast enough. And then I found online a company that sells old computers that are damaged and things. So I bought a damaged 5K that was a better computer than what I had, because I had kind of a low-end one, and I replaced the whole motherboard inside, and man, is it a lot faster, a lot more CPUs and everything. So there's ways to upgrade them. But why, you might ask, did Morgan Stanley Smith Barney get fined $35 million? Well, here's the bottom line. They had apparently been selling off devices full of customers' personal identifiable information. If you want this article and more, craigpeterson.com. Make sure you sign up right now, especially if you're a business. So they were selling these things off. Interesting, no? Well, I want to warn everybody that you should be doing what I just described. It is so important to keep your personal information safe, to keep your business information safe. And if you have any medical records, this is required by law. There's jail time. And if you have any contracts with the Department of Defense, that's true too. But I don't want you to just think about the computers or the servers when it comes to destroying the data. Remember, photocopiers nowadays are printers, and they have hard disks in them. So they load your print job onto the hard disk. They load that scan when you're making a copy onto the hard disk. You got to destroy those too. Yeah, man, don't get fined and don't get your business taken from you. From Virginia to California to France to Japan and beyond, nuclear power is all the rage again. Wow, wait a minute. We need reliable electricity? What's going on here? This is no surprise, I don't think, to anybody who thinks at all, let alone thinks for a living. It was in this week's newsletter. You should have received it on Monday. But it's from FEE Stories online, and it's talking about nuclear power. Now, the governor of Virginia, I was just told this last week, has now ordered one of these new nuclear plants. He must be listening to the show, because for a couple of years I've been suggesting this, and we talked about the newest generation of nuclear technology very, very recently. And what he has said is, hey, listen, we need nuclear. Now, these new nuclear plants are small. They are made in a factory. We're not talking about having to have custom-built power plants like we've had for years in nuclear. And they are intrinsically safe. It doesn't need electricity to run, like what happened in Fukushima, a 3-mile island. If you lose your power grid, it doesn't matter. If the pumps stop, it doesn't matter. It is all self-contained. It's shipped on trucks, and it uses basic physics to make sure it is intrinsically safe. So why wouldn't you do that? Well, Governor Gavin Newsom, he was spearheading this 11th hour effort to pass legislation to extend a lifeline to Diablo Canyon. This is a massive nuclear power plant, 2,200 megawatts. It supplies some 8% of the energy produced in California. Isn't that something? Under pressure from lawmakers, environmental activists, the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, PG&E, who's been fined multiple times by California for rolling blackouts and other things, fires among them, agreed in 2016 to decommission Diablo when its operating licenses expire in 2024 and 2025. But in light of the recent energy policy environment, you know, the one where President Biden, day one, cut our sources of natural gas and oil, and I can't believe the stuff he's saying now. It's just so, it's incredulous. But yeah, we need electricity. So now California lawmakers are kind of having some second thoughts. European lawmakers are having second thoughts. They are bringing nuclear power plants back online, the old designs that are sitting there. And they're also now saying that nuclear power is green. Yeah, now I don't know what AOC has to say because, of course, she is the standard by which all things are measured. But they're saying it's green. And I agree. I absolutely agree. You know, when you consider the risks and the deaths and the injuries from all of these other types of power, man, there is no comparison how safe nuclear is. It's kind of like driving your car versus flying in a plane. And based on the number of miles that you're traveling, how safe is it? Planes are just incredibly safe. Same thing with nuclear power and these new fourth generation plants. Wow, very, very safe. So that's going to be very interesting. Now, when Newsom was running for governor, and of course, we're all expecting him to run for president next cycle. This was back in 2016. He said, I don't see that this plant is going to survive beyond 2024 and 2025. I just don't see that. And there is a compelling argument as to why it shouldn't, he said. So now he's being kind of quiet about it, and he's encouraging the legislature to go ahead and let's extend Diablo Canyon's operating license. Belgium, one of several European countries, it's extending, it's set to expire licenses to keep nuclear plants operational. Belgium's a small country. France, a very large country, as our vice president might describe it, has proposed building up to 14 new nuclear plants in the coming years. Japan, which shuttered nuclear reactors after the 2011 Fukushima crisis, and that was entirely brought on by themselves. They did not follow the engineer's instructions on building that plant, where to build that plant, and where to build the backup power. Okay, so it's an older generation power plant, by the way, designed in the United States, and they messed it up, and they refused to take any, the people who messed it up, take any responsibility for it. It's crazy. But Japan wants to restart up to 9 reactors. The UK, Poland, the Czech Republic, they are all putting plans in place to build new nuclear reactors. So nuclear power is suddenly the in thing nowadays, right? Natural gas prices have skyrocketed. States like New Hampshire that burn natural gas to create electricity. Can't believe New Hampshire shut down so many of those plants. Massachusetts, Vermont, everybody. What's the matter with you people? Anyways, so they are New Hampshire. Their electric price doubled in when was it? September 2022 in New Hampshire, because they're burning natural gas. But that's nothing compared to Europe. They recently hit an all-time high, the equivalent of $600 per barrel oil prices. Businesses are reporting a 5-fold year-over-year price increase. 5-fold. Could you survive that? 500%? So Europe's in the middle of a full-blown energy crisis. No small part because they pursued this fake green energy agenda. And I say fake because it's not green. All it does is move the pollution somewhere else. It moves the risk somewhere else. It moves the lives lost somewhere else. But it shifted from domestic production, especially when we're talking about fossil fuels and nuclear power, and went to this reliance on natural gas imports from Russia. Now, we had pipelines. We had power lines coming down from Canada. In the Northeast, we were counting on this huge DC power line coming down from Hydro-Quebec. No, we can't have that. We can't have that. Not in my backyard. No, we can't have windmills. Not off the Cape. No, not in my backyard. Right? So the situation in California is obviously different than in Europe. But there's also a clear reason that California is second-guessing its decision to shut down its single largest power station. The reason? Its energy grid is in terrible shape. They've had rolling blackouts. They managed to survive the summer without a whole lot of rolling blackouts. They encouraged people to not charge their electric cars. They set thermostats at 78 degrees or higher. Don't use large appliances. Turn off unnecessary lights. In Colorado, they used these new smart thermometers, thermostats that we have in our homes. Yeah, in Colorado, they used those to reset your air conditioning during the summertime. Doesn't matter what you set it at. No. The government is going to cut it back here because you're a horrible, horrible waster of electricity. It's terrible. So California is seen as green energy success stories, and in some ways it is. They've had solar panel encouraged on roofs for more than 20 years. Of course, now the chickens are come home to roost, as they say, as 10% of all of those toxic solar panels that are being removed from the roofs because they're no longer effective, they're broken down, they're going into landfills and they're polluting California's meager water supply. This just goes on and on. The real problem is the energy supply. So California's energy grid is stretched. Look at in New England what happened here, what's happening around the world. It's crazy. By the way, Diablo Canyon doesn't just generate more than 8% of all of California's electricity. It also accounts for 17% of the carbon-free production. So what's our goal here? We know the Jane Fonda and China syndrome was just a load of garbage. It doesn't happen. Can't happen. Look at the worst case we can think of, which was in Ukraine under the Soviet Union. Turned out to be bad, but wasn't that bad. Bottom line. And these new reactors, this won't happen. This can't happen. Completely new designs. The scientists are following something called physics. Yeah, okay. So it goes on and on. The anti-nuclear movement started in California. Environmentalists have opposed nuclear power, primarily from fears about nuclear waste. Well, have a look at what's been going on with the batteries that have been taken out of electric cars. They are now sitting in storage. Huge lots of storage leaking into the environment. And that's not even talking about the manufacture of these batteries and how toxic it is to the environment. I wish they would just be honest and look at all of this stuff, right? Really, come on. Anyways, you might have a neighbor. Have you seen these green means go signs in yards? And they're pointing out how an F-150 guzzles a gallon of gasoline for every 25 road miles. But he ignores that it took tens of thousands of pounds of CO2 emissions to produce the battery that charges his Tesla. And don't even tell him where the cobalt in the battery comes from, where the nickel comes from. Yeah, on and on, right? Anyways. On utility scale, solar power has a carbon footprint higher than nuclear power, or solar panels produce literally tons of toxic waste. I mean, a lot of it. So I'm going to try and dig up for next week the hard numbers. What's the hard numbers? What are the hard truths? You'll get it in my Monday newsletter, CraigPeterson.com, for the free newsletter right now. CraigPeterson.com/subscribe. And I'll see you guys there. You know, we all want a green world. I can't think of anybody that doesn't want one. Of course, there's people with ulterior motives, right? That's a different thing. But California has really caused itself a whole lot of non-green. Rooftop solar, right? That's going to be the solution to all of our problems. Yeah. Not the fact that the electric cars people buy use 3 times as much electricity as our air conditioners. Yeah, not the fact that we have rolling blackouts because we don't have enough power, because we've shut down plants before we were actually ready to replace that power. Not that Texas is right now having blackouts, as is California having blackouts because of the stupidity of some of these regulators. It's absolutely crazy. You know, we are the greenest country in the world. All of our plants, our coal plants, are cleaner than anybody else's anywhere in the world. And California's really got itself into a big problem here because, again, of short-sightedness. I just don't get it. maybe it is follow the money. Maybe, Nancy Pelosi's husband making millions of dollars and using inside information is absolutely true, and maybe it has to do with that, right? It's not really green. It's to enrich the politicians. How can you go to Washington, D.C. on the salary Congress has, as expensive as it is in Washington, D.C., and come out a multi-millionaire? There's only one way that can happen, right? I remember the trade that Hillary Clinton made. What was it, beef or something, right? And she made like $80,000. Well, that sort of tip is a sort of thing that'll put Martha Stewart in jail. But not our politicians. It's absolutely crazy. I don't get it. So California, they have been a pioneer in pushing for rooftop solar panels. Now, I get it. They're cool. I get it. It's really nice to have the grid buy electricity back from you when there is plenty of sun and when the grid needs it. But the grids aren't really set up for this sort of stuff. But I know a few listeners that really love their solar panels. There's one guy who has put a whole bunch of panels up, solar panels, in a field, and he has some cattle and horses and stuff, and so they live with these solar panels in the field, and he bought himself a couple of Nissan Leafs. These are these electric cars from Nissan. You might remember them. They've been around for a while, and he's just tickled pink that, yeah, he had to buy the solar panels. Yeah, he had to install them. Yeah, he has to keep the snow off of them. Yeah, he has to clean the dust off of them. Yeah, he has to clean all of the bird stuff off of them. But it's free, right? Yeah, okay. So he gets to drive around, and he says, I don't usually go much further than the grocery store or maybe a quick run to Tractor Supply. And it doesn't cost him anything incrementally. So California decided it was going to go green, right? And what's one of the best ways to do that? Well, we need more electricity. Let's go for rooftop solar. In fact, California decided it would go ahead and subsidize these wonderful solar panels on people's roofs all over the place. Not like one big central farm out in the Mojave Desert that's collecting all of the solar it can possibly collect and then turn it into electricity that can feed into the grid. No, it's all decentralized. It's on all of these rooftops. Now, we're talking about 20 years later. There are 1.3 million rooftops estimated to have solar cells on them out there in California. And the real bill is coming due. It isn't cleaning the bird excrement off. The real bill in California for the rooftop solar isn't getting the snow off of them, keeping them clean. No, it has to do with completely non-green stuff here. 90% of all of these solar cells that were put onto roofs in California that have been taken down, 90% of them have ended up in landfills. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the lifetime of these solar panels is 25, maybe 30 years, as long as they're not damaged. Or if you really want to keep up with the technology, because solar panels are increasing in efficiency as time goes on, it might be a lot less, right? It might be like a 10 to 15 year cycle if you have that much money out there. But many of these are now winding up in landfills. And the real concern is that they could contaminate groundwater. I've talked about this before. If these solar panels crack, what could happen? Well, they have heavy toxic metals in them, such as lead. We know how bad lead is, right? Can't have lead in your house anymore. Selenium, cadmium, right? All things you don't want to have. Mercury vapor. You don't want to go anywhere near mercury vapor, except for the fact that the federal government forced us to put them into our homes in the form of Curly Q light bulbs. Remember those things? Yeah, highly toxic. Breaking one of those light bulbs, a fluorescent light, makes your home a toxic waste site. according to EPA regulation. So I'm sure if you ever had a fluorescent light bulb break, and that includes the bigger ones, right? You might have in the roof, up on the top of your office, wherever it might be. You must have went out and you bought, maybe even had standing by for you, some really wonderful plastic that you could put up, tape up, so that you can isolate the room that has the toxic waste in it from breaking that light bulb that the federal government made you buy, because you couldn't buy regular incandescent bulbs that you wanted anymore. And they encouraged you, and they gave you discounts on it, and they subsidized, those bulbs. And then, of course, you went in with a full respirator and a full suit on, that, Tyvek, and you taped it up. Make sure that tape up around the gloves onto the Tyvek suit so that none of that mercury gets onto your skin. And then you obviously used a specialized vacuum cleaner for toxic hazardous waste and vacuumed up like the carpet or the floor, or maybe it got onto your couch, right? You did all of that. And then you put it all into a sealed container of some sort, typically like a glass bottle or something, so it's not going to be able to get out. Right? You must have done all of that, because I'm sure everyone knew what was going on with those fluorescent bulbs, those little curly cube bulbs, right? Does that make sense to you? Yeah, exactly. So now California has 1.3 million rooftops with rooftop solar power on them. Now, it isn't like it's out in, as I mentioned, a great place. Put it out in the Mojave Desert, right? They got more sun than they need out there. And so it's all one place, and they can take those panels and they can recycle them. No, because it's illegal to recycle them in California because of the heavy metals, the toxic metals. So instead of that, people are just dumping them in their trash and taking them to landfills, etc., etc. We're talking about truckloads of waste, some of this stuff badly contaminated, and it really shows how short-sighted environmental policy can create incredible problems that were easily foreseen, right? Though the industry is supposed to be green, but in reality, according to Sam Vanderhoff, who is a solar industry expert, chief executive of Recycle PV Solar, he says the reality about this industry is not that it's green, but in reality it's all about the money. Wait a minute, isn't that what I just said earlier? Yeah. So California came early with solar power. They granted $3.3 billion in subsidies for installing solar panels on rooftops. And yet, barreling ahead with this renewable energy program, they are now at a point where they have rolling blackouts. They have problems with electricity generation. They have problems with the rooftop solar. And as it has aged, getting rid of it. Have you seen those pictures of Hawaii with those windmill farms that are just sitting there rusting away because the windmills aren't turning? You'd think Hawaii, right? A lot of wind. Isn't that a great way to do it? But it takes a lot of space, kills some birds, and it takes a lot of maintenance. They're very expensive to maintain. So they just let some of these wind farms just totally rust away. We need to elect people, send them to Washington, D.C., that don't touch things like this with a 5,000-foot pole. The reason is that you look at a great investor, a great business investor, that they make money, right? Oh, wouldn't it be great to be Mark Cuban or one of the sharks, right, that are making money, investing money? Well, yeah, it certainly would be. They, at best, make money out of 1 out of 10 investments. Federal government, that's pretty close to zero, right? Oh, no, that's not true, right? We talked about the millions of dollars that Congress people make. Yeah, so they don't bat zero. The Congress and this political class bats 1,000 in their own pocket. Let's stop this stuff in Washington, D.C. It's insanity. Thank goodness California did this so we can see how insane these solar rooftop policies are, at least for the near future. Well, we've talked about solar cells. We've talked about the new nuclear, which is incredible stuff. Well, there is a new MIT spin-out that's tapping into a million-year energy supply right here. Government has been terrible about picking winners. It kind of reminds me of a quote from Henry Ford where he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And that's kind of the mentality of government. Whatever they're investing in, or their friends, their buddies, their voters, their donors are investing in, that's what they'll push. So we haven't had a fair shake of some of these technologies, really. You know, the hydrogen, who knows what else we could be powering our cars with that hasn't come forward because government's been putting just literally trillions of dollars of support into electric cars. Okay, an electric car is great, don't get me wrong. They're cool technology. I wouldn't mind owning one of them. But the government should not be the one who decides the winners and losers. That's the communist way. That's central planning. Central planning does not work. I'm really on a bit of a rampage today. This is just crazy. But this is a reason right now, what I'm going to talk about, why central planning has failed us yet again, right? Just because it's a big problem doesn't mean it's a federal government problem. And the big problem is, okay, all of us want green stuff, right? Not this green movement that's all about, again, central planning, government control, not that stuff. But we want a clean environment. We want good, healthy food. We want all of this stuff that's going to make us healthy, the world healthy, the earth healthy, feed the population of the world, everything. Everybody does. I don't get it. I don't know why well, anyways, we won't get into that right now. Here's an example. Government has been moving us directly towards solar panels, which we've talked about, and how they really can and do hurt the environment very, very badly. We talked about the disposal of them. We've talked before about the manufacturing of solar panels and how it is horrific when it comes to the health of our planet. How about this one? This MIT group. It's really kind of cool here. Quaise Energy is this company that they founded, and it is a spin out from MIT. And what they're looking to do is use the power potential that's beneath our feet in order to create literally a carbon-free, pollution-free energy source. Absolutely amazing. Now, we've talked about this for a long time. You look at some of these countries in the world that have a lot of volcanic activity. I'm particularly thinking about Iceland right now, and how they are taking all of this geothermal potential and turning it into electricity, which is fantastic, right? And when you look at the stability of geothermal, it is dead on. It is there. It is always there. If you're looking at the stability of geothermal, for instance, just think of a volcano. How often do the volcanoes move? It's pretty solid, pretty long term. Certainly there's tectonic activity and the plates move, but it's at just an incredibly slow rate. You're talking about inches a year. Well, they've looked at a couple of things. One is this abandoned coal power plant in upstate New York. And as overall people are looking at it saying it's worth nothing, right? It's a relic from ages gone by. Heaven forbid we burn coal. And I would rather not burn coal personally. But get down and think about this now. You've got a coal power plant. What does that have in it that might be useful? Well, it still has transmission lines that run to the grid, the power grid. It's a central producer of electricity, which is exactly how our power grid is set up. We're not set up for having every home, or half of them or whatever it is, generating electricity with solar power or having windmills here and there. We're set up for having centralized power generation, Nikola Tesla aside, right? That's how we're set up. So this old coal power plant has transmission lines. It still has a power turbine. How does a coal plant work? How does a nuclear plant work? It generates heat, and that heat creates steam, and that steam is used to drive a turbine. Much like what happens at a hydroelectric dam. The water drives a turbine, and then that turbine ultimately, of course, drives a massive alternator of some sort of a generator, if you will. And that's hooked up to our power lines. Now, what's really interesting here is their technology. You might have heard about this place. I remember reading about this and all kinds of interesting stories about this hole that was drilled in Russia, I think it was. And they went down, what was it, like 5,000 feet or something? And they abandoned it, right? Because they were trying to do the whole thing. But here's the interesting part of what the MIT guys are saying, that the crust anywhere in the world, it kind of varies a little bit, but basically about 10 to 20 kilometers deep, has enough geothermal energy to drive something like this power plant, this old coal power plant in upstate New York. But the problem is, how do you drill that deep? The Russians, the Soviet Union, had a hard time doing it, and they didn't reach their ultimate goal. And interesting backstories on all of that we don't have time for today. But what these guys are doing is they have created an approach that vaporizes the rock. So they're not drilling. And if you've ever seen drilling operations, watched it on the Discovery Channel or something, which I have, it's really cool. You realize that when they start hitting hard rock, granite, bedrock, they stop because it becomes so slow. So they use the diamond tip drill heads and they drill, and it's slow. But what's happening right now is they're using gyrotrons to heat the material. It's been done for years in nuclear fusion experiments, but they're taking that basic technology and using it for new geothermal drilling techniques. That is cool. So these gyrotrons haven't been well known in the general science community. Fusion researchers know about it. But what they're saying is this is going to give them the ability to drill these massive holes, depth-wise. And right now, 400 feet is kind of as far as we can usually drill. But this is going to let them go kilometers into the earth. They're going to be able to tap into that. The energy here, basically you're talking about what you get out of a volcano, right? That sort of energy, that heat, bring it up and then boil the water and run it through that coal power plant. At least the infrastructure that's in there, the generators and everything else. So very, very cool. And this is something that's being done right now. They expect within a few years to have an actual functional demonstration of this, blasting its way through melting rock, and some of the hardest rock on the surface of the earth. Hey, you should have received my insider show notes Tuesday morning. If you didn't, you can get them for free. Just go to craigpeterson.com. And if you have any questions, just email me, me@craigpeterson.com. Do you remember this moment from The Fifth Element?
Old tricks are the best tricks, eh?
Yeah, well, we're talking about attackers right now, cybersecurity, and the old tricks are the best tricks. No doubt about that. They're back to the old ways. Yep. Oh well. There are a lot of security firms out there. It's just absolutely amazing to me. I get ads all of the time, as you can imagine, from dozens and dozens of startups and big guys. And I'm looking at a page right now, and there's, 6 different ads on here for cybersecurity stuff. This is a site called Dark Reading. It's one that I pay some fairly close attention to because they are talking about cybersecurity stuff, so I guess that makes sense. But attackers are doing things every day. Right now, what are they doing? That's what Robert Lemos is talking about. And he's looking at a report that was produced by yet another security firm called Tetra Defense. And they analyzed data from the first quarter 2022. Now, when you think about cybersecurity and the problems we have, what do you think about? What do you think of? Is it ransomware? Phishing, maybe? What do you think it is? Well, what this Tetra Defense found is that 54% more costs here from compromises caused by user actions comes from, drumroll, Pete, please. I don't know if I said that very well. Let me just do that one more time, okay? Take 2. Compromises cost victims 54% more when we're talking about unpatched servers and vulnerable remote access systems like Microsoft RDP, remote desktop. 54% more. That is huge. Absolutely huge. Who would have thought of that? By the way, these unpatched vulnerabilities from the first quarter and exposing risky services such as remote desktop protocol account for 82% of successful attacks, while social engineering employees, and that includes things like phishing, accounted for just 18% of successful compromises. That, my friends, is a very, very big deal. And as I said at the very beginning, it is no trick that they've been up to for a long time. So what I'm trying to get at here, I know I'm kind of wandering a little here mentally, but I'm trying to get at the point that we have to patch our systems. And we have to apply patches ASAP. We have to make sure those patches are in place, because it's an absolutely horrible situation out there. I know a lot of companies that use Microsoft's remote desktop, and it has been just a horrific battleground when it comes to hackers because of all of the bugs that have been found in there and major vulnerabilities. The Log4 shell bug, this is the one that's tying into Java, has been reported on a whole lot. But it is used in about 22% of breaches. So that's not bad for one vulnerability. And it's a crazy vulnerability. This is a problem with languages like Java, where you have people writing code that don't realize what's happening in all of these libraries they're pulling in. You know, in Java, you just say, okay, write this out to a file for me. And don't realize that the code that's actually doing that is parsing what you send it, and it might have a command in it that you send to it, and it'll execute the command. And that's the basics of that particular problem, okay? So we're expecting all of these tactics to continue. There are a finite amount today of vulnerable Exchange servers, which is another problem that the attackers have been using to really cause a whole lot of problems for us. But there will be new problems in the future. There's always new software introduced, and the new software always has more problems. And there are a lot of people in the cybersecurity business that say we should just assume that systems are compromised. So instead of trying to protect them as much, let's look for the compromises, which is an interesting way of doing things, frankly. So cloud misconfiguration, that's another big one that's out there, and I'm seeing that all of the time. Right now we're working with a client that's using a lot of Microsoft Azure stuff. And Microsoft Azure, Amazon, in fact, Amazon S3 buckets, which are a way to store files up in the cloud inside Amazon, have really been hit hard because of misconfiguration. You see, when it gets very difficult to configure something, people tend to take shortcuts, don't think it through, and in this case, they have lost a whole lot. But it's hard to estimate the damages, but looking at it, we're talking about major cybersecurity incidents accounting for about 2 to 10% of annual revenue cost-wise. So a company that has maybe $100 million in annual revenue could be looking at as much as 10% of that. In other words, $10 million as a financial impact of a cybersecurity incident. Now, it's probably not going to cost them $10 million to secure everything, but it might cost them $1 million a year. And they just don't do it. It's just they don't bother doing it. Look at the huge breaches that we've had from some of these credit reporting agencies, if you will, that keep all this personal information and data on us, that have lost data for 200 million Americans, right? Really? They cared? And yet they just rake in money. They just print money. It's absolutely crazy. By the way, there was another report that was released a little earlier this year from CrowdStrike, and it has a report that's based on incident data, and the one they released earlier this year was from 2021. And it's showing that breaches related to ransomware attacks had grown by 82%. And the data showed that malware had only been used in 38% of successful intrusions, and 45% of attackers were manually conducting the attacks. So if you thought early on when we started talking here that ransomware was maybe the biggest problem, you're not entirely wrong, because ransomware is the biggest growing problem that we're seeing out there right now. So it's absolutely crazy. Now, the average time to move from an initial compromise, remember they're doing these things automated up front to try and find vulnerable systems or to try and get the ransomware out into your hands. That might be through a phishing attack, which, by the way, phishing attacks increased 29%. So from the time they get that initial compromise to the time they're attacking other systems on the network, it's still about 1.5 hours, according to the data that came out of CrowdStrike. Now, that is concerning, too, because that means you basically have an hour and a half after you've been compromised to detect it and do something about it. And that's why we use automated systems with our clients that really keep a close tab on everything, look for various types of compromises, etc., etc. And I think it's an important thing to do, because if you can't tell if you've been compromised, you just can't defend yourself. Hey, if you sign up for my newsletter, I will send you my most popular special reports. That includes password special reports, how to use password managers, what the best ones are. Absolutely free, right? I got a couple of others that I'll send you, and you will get my weekly show notes that come out Tuesday mornings most weeks. And that will allow you to keep up to date on all of this, be a little bit ahead, in fact, of the radio show. Because I'm talking about stuff that was in my insider show notes on Tuesday, so you get it in advance of everybody else. Just go to craigpeterson.com, sign up right there, and you will be well on your way. Hey, stick around, because we'll be right back. Any questions? Me at craigpeterson.com. We've got a couple of things to talk about right now. We've got Elon Musk. He's got to be worried about this lawsuit that's coming up, and we'll tell you about that. And then also TikTok is in the news here. We got two different problems with TikTok that talk about today. You know, of course, about this whole thing. Elon Musk said he wanted to buy Twitter for a measly, what was it, $44 billion, right? Real money, and that's a problem, especially when Twitter is alleged to be not worth as much as Twitter appears to be. You see, Twitter has had to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission reports about their income, obviously, right, and expenses and management, and they have forward-looking statements about what they're going to be doing in the future, and all of that goes into a pot and kind of gets stirred up. And once it's all stirred up, the investors look at it and say, yeah, okay, I want to invest in Twitter. One of the big variables that goes into the pot has to do with advertising revenue, which is based on eyeballs. How many eyeballs can Twitter attract? And of course, that means Twitter wants to keep as many eyeballs as possible on the site at once, right? And for the longest time possible. So that all makes some sense. But Twitter's been reporting in its public reports that less than 5% of the users / postings there on Twitter, but less than 5% of the users are actually bots. These bots are used by bad guys, evil companies, and there are a lot of those out there that are trying to promote themselves. Look at how great we are. Yes, look at, wow, we're trending on Twitter. You should buy our stuff. And in reality, what they're doing is they are paying people who have bots to post thousands of tweets from different accounts using that company's hashtag. It makes me ill, frankly, to think about this stuff, but that's what they do. So if Twitter has a lot of these bots that are fake and are just trying to drive up the investor's price for some random product, or maybe it's what happened during the last few election cycles where Russia, China were meddling and getting people to vote for Trump, against Trump, for Hillary, against Hillary, Biden, etc., right? Is it worth as much as investors thought? So I've been worried about what's going to happen here. Elon Musk, he's got to be worried. If he actually ends up buying it, what's going to happen? Is the Securities and Exchange Commission going to do an investigation? Are they already doing one, frankly? Probably are. And is he going to be liable for it? So Twitter's value has dropped. Now, it obviously went up when Musk made that generous $44 billion purchase offer, but it has gone down since then. And since there are so many analysts saying, well, there's at least 10% bots, and others saying it's 40%, it's 60%, and that kind of is based on the traffic, right? The amount of traffic the bots are generating versus the number of accounts that are bot accounts. What happens? What should they do? How should they do it? How should they account for it? And if it's that high, and there's questions about how high it is, then Twitter's stock value is going to go down. So Musk pulled out of this whole thing. And yeah, I can see why he did. However, Delaware is where a lot of these public companies are incorporated. That's where their, corporate headquarters are, if you will. That's where they get their authority to operate as a company. And the reason a lot of them do that in Delaware is Delaware has laws and taxes that are very favorable to publicly traded companies. And that says something right there too, doesn't it? Well, Delaware has this thing called the Court of Chancery. And the judge that's handling Twitter's lawsuit against Musk, her name is Kathleen McCormick. She is the chief judge. In this case, it's called the court's chancellor. Has what Reuters called a no-nonsense reputation, as well as the distinction of being one of the few jurists who has ever ordered a reluctant buyer to close a U.S. corporate merger. And specifically, she ordered last year an affiliate of a private equity firm to close its $550 million purchase of a holding company that makes cake decorating products. But because of the lockdown, the value of that cake decorating company dropped pretty dramatically because people just weren't going out and buying this stuff to make cakes. They weren't celebrating. They weren't having parties. They didn't have cakes, right? So she forced them to buy this other company at the original price, even though the value of the company, that holding company, had dropped. So this is going to be really rather interesting. If you look at her ruling, she said the buyers lost their appetite for the deal shortly after signing it, as government entities issued stay-at-home orders around the country, and the weekly sales declined dramatically. Rather than use reasonable efforts to work around a definitive credit agreement, the buyers called their litigation counsel and began evaluating ways to get out of the deal. Without input from the management, they prepared a draconian reforecast of the projected sales based on uninformed and largely unexplained assumptions that were inconsistent with real-time sales data. That's where Elon Musk may have an out if he's played his cards right. Now, what really kind of confused me about all of this is that the guys at Twitter have a pretty solid case because they were able to negotiate as part of this potential purchase or merger, whatever you might want to call it. Really, it's a purchase. They have a pretty solid case because they got some amazing language into this agreement. I just can't believe that Elon Musk and his attorneys allowed it to go in there. Now, these cases here in the Delaware Court of Chancery are decided by the presiding judge and not a jury, although a judge can get an advisory jury to help consult. But the judge's decision can be appealed to the state Supreme Court, and then the decision is final. And Twitter proposed a 4-day trial with a September 19th start date. And the court, I believe, said we're going to push it off to October. I'll try and keep an eye on this case because I think it's fascinating to see what happens here as we go forward to our friend Elon Musk. Now, TikTok, oh man, if you didn't get my newsletter this week, which you should have had, my insider show notes on Tuesday morning, and follow through and read these 2 articles on TikTok, you really missed something. But I'll give you a quick summary here right now. We spoke about TikTok and what they have done here with this blackout challenge. Now, it's not TikTok. They're not the ones promoting the challenge, but they are making money off of it and they're promoting their site. It's just yet another challenge that TikTok has. Well, one of the things that's been happening in Ukraine with this Russian invasion is people have been making TikTok videos, and they have been posting them, and they include all kinds of stuff. I'm sure there's dead soldiers in there, Russian tanks that have been completely blown apart. What a bad design, by the way, and many other things. And TikTok says, hey, wait a minute, we can't keep these, even though they have been asked to preserve the Ukraine content for war crime investigations. What has come out recently? You remember Orange Man Bad said that TikTok needed to be shut down. They wanted it out. He wanted it out of the, and not just him, but other people, out of the app stores because it's being used by Chinese intelligence and they're doing all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Well, it turns out that our friends at TikTok have been, in fact, sending all of the stuff that you are filming to China. Now, TikTok is illegal to use in China, so they're not sending it to China to show the Chinese, because China is smart enough to not allow people to use TikTok. They're using it for espionage. TikTok even, just a few weeks ago, changed its usage document here, right? Terms of use, saying, we're going to use the video that you submit. We're going to collect biometric information. We're going to collect information about things and people in the foreground, things and people in the background. In other words, they're now putting together what you might call a social matrix. So they know who your friends are, what you're doing. They know about you. They're doing facial recognition of you. It goes on and on and on. Very, very bad. But because it's so popular with these young Ukrainians and even Russian troops who are posting footage of the war, they've got some stuff that would be great for the war crime investigators. And remember when President Trump said, "Oh no, we got to cut out TikTok," and the left, his opposition, was saying, "Oh no, TikTok is great, it's wonderful." Oh, and TikTok said, "Yeah, we have U.S.-based servers, nothing to worry about here. I don't know what Trump is talking about. The guy's an idiot." Well, as I just mentioned, we found out absolutely that they're saving it, they're sending it to China, and remember now, the Chinese Communist Party is a friend of Russia's. They're buying oil for very cheap prices. They're providing Russia with a number of different things. They're being a little cautious about it. But they will not allow war crime investigators to look at TikTok videos that have to do with the war in Ukraine. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. A lot of data pulled from your device, sent back to China, biometrics, face prints, voice prints, keystroke patterns, rhythms, search and browsing history, location information. Do not let your kids go to TikTok. And this week, I got an email from a listener saying that one of her close friends' child died because of the blackout challenge. If that's not enough.